Village Square Booksellers in Bellows Falls. It's Bellows Falls third Friday, and we're here to welcome Eric Rickstad, who's returning with his newest book. And this one is a standalone. It's not one of the detectives.
Yeah.
And it's it's scary. And yeah. And we have a bit of an unreliable narrator too.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
And anyways, we're all excited about hearing what he has to say and learning about what plans he has for the next one.
All right.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate people coming out on a Friday when you could be doing absolutely anything else. So, you know, it's nice that people have taken the time to come out to a bookstore and to see me and buy some books and frequent the bookshop. So thanks very much. All of my books are set up in the Northeast Kingdom. I was up there a lot as a kid, and we still go up there as often as we can, my wife and I and our family and my daughter and I. And I always loved the majesty of it and the remoteness of it and the isolation. And I loved how, where I grew up, it was more along the Green Mountains and how the spine in the Green Mountain transitions from those hardwood, maple, oak forests and river bottoms with alders and stuff into like this boreal forest that's dark with a lot of cedars and hemlocks and spruce, and towns like Victory that have populations of 42, and other towns that have populations of 64. And I would fish and hunt and explore up there, and I loved the beauty of it. But I also became aware as I got older of sort of the underside of that, as there often is, of crimes that can happen and violence that can happen and other things that can shake up not just the towns but the whole state. If you think about what happened several years ago up in St. Johnsbury with the teacher, and even our neighbor, my wife and I's 80-year-old neighbor in Arlington, Vermont, just a year and a half ago was murdered in her own home from half a mile from our house. And I've always been interested in how that works, the paradox between living in a place that most people would want to come to and is bucolic and peaceful, and then these things sort of erupt and shatter communities. And I like to write about how people recover from that, how law enforcement works to solve certain crimes that happen, and I also like writing about the natural world up there and sort of the darker places and those places that have a gothic feel. And I'm really honored that Joe Citro is here tonight, 'cause some of all of his books, Shadow Child and The Gore and others, really inspired me when I was first reading those books, and they continue to today. I wrote a piece of eight books that I love, that are still a list of 8 books set in isolated places for a website called Crime Reads just this past week, and Joe's Shadow Child is on there because it was influential. So it's cool you're here. And so I'm going to read a couple short chapters of Prologue. In the first short chapter, I tend to write really short chapters, each shorter and shorter as we've had kids and end up reading in bed at night, and we can barely stay awake and barely remember half of what we read the night before. And I think anyone who reads like that at this point in their life, you look ahead and you're like, oh man, that's a long chapter. And you look and you're like, wait, that chapter's only 4 pages. I can read that. And then you do it again, and you do it again, and before you know it, you've read my book whether you wanted to or not. So, and I like the rhythm of short chapters too. I've always liked that, and partly because I've always enjoyed short stories. So I try to write chapters that read like little vignettes or short stories that kind of leave on a beat where you're compelled to read more, because I leave you hanging a little bit. And this book is a standalone. It's not part of the Cane and Crime series, which these 3 are. Reap's a standalone too. And it's about a man whose wife and daughter disappear in 1987. So don't be jarred by the Bartles and James reference. And he comes home and soon finds they're missing, and he becomes a suspect, of course, and he feels after a while betrayed by the town, even though the daughter and wife are never found or not found for a long time. And he retreats to the mountains and becomes a recluse. And 25 years later, while he's up in the woods, he discovers a girl that was about the same age as his daughter when she disappeared, and he begins to think somehow she's linked to his missing wife and daughter. But to the unreliable narrator point, it's you as a reader, and even him himself, begins to wonder if he sort of wants that to be so badly, out of grief and loss all these years later, if he's maybe going mad, or if there really is a connection. So anyway, I'll stop talking. So this prologue is called The Pit. The pit lay hidden beneath a bewilderment of vines and lush undergrowth, concealed amid the shadows of beeches and hemlock, as cool and damp as a fresh grave. The two girls knelt at its edge and peered down. Neither girl knew what the pit was for or how it came to be. Neither cared. The pit was theirs. They'd found it fair and square while exploring this part of the woods their parents had forbade them to ever enter. The lure of the woods and the pits, and the possible secrets they might reveal, an arrowhead or a dinosaur fossil, proved too alluring to resist. Toads had fallen into the pit. They squatted sullen in the muck at the bottom as crickets sprang and trilled around them. Other creatures had fallen prey to the pit as well, their frail skeletal remains and desiccated carcasses scattered in the mud. In the darkest corner, a knot of baby snakes pulsed and writhed like a malformed heart. The girls remained unafraid. Together they could brave whatever peril came. They lay on their bellies now, inched backward over the edge of the pit to hang from its lip, fingers clawing into the earthen edge. Their feet dangled, and their bony arms tensed as they hung straight down beside each other, looked into each other's eyes, whispered, 1, 2, 3, and let go to drop the final few inches with horrified shrieks, as if they were plummeting 1,000 feet to their deaths. They squealed as mud squished between their bare toes, and the gamey, milky reptilian odor of the snakes bloomed around them. Their skinny legs stuck out straight as pins as the girls sat at opposite ends of the pit, facing each other, the bottoms of their bare feet pressed against each other as their pink fingers picked away at the earthen walls in search of a remnant mystery of the past. Today, however, there was another mystery to reveal. Lucinda's heart skittered with excitement. She'd waited forever to hear Sally's secret. Tell me, she pleaded now, as she slapped the mosquito on her cheek, the insect sticking to her skin with a splat of her own warm blood. Sally smiled. Her teeth glowed in the murk. A ray of sun lanced down through the thatch of leaves above to light up a lens of Sally's thick eyeglasses. Can you keep a secret? Sally whispered. What a ding-dong question. Of course Lucinda could keep a secret, especially Sally's secrets. Didn't they always? That's what friends were for, to tell each other secrets and to keep them. And Lucinda and Sally were best friends and would always be best friends, forever. So of course they told each other everything. And the whole entire reason they even came to the pit was for Sally to tell Lucinda, to show Lucinda the secret. But Sally was teasing, and it drove Lucinda crazy when her friend did that. Tell me, Lucinda said. Don't tease. Sally leaned in, still smiling, except now her smile seemed plastic and freakish, like a smile on a crazed clown doll. Why are you smiling like that? Lucinda said. You can't tell anyone, Sally whispered. I won't. Ever. I won't, Lucinda said. I said I won't. Promise? Hope to die. Come on. Sally leaned in, cupped a hand around Lucinda's ear, and whispered the secret. Lucinda yanked away and pushed herself back, deeper into her corner of the pit, her heart knocking. She looked up at the snarl of branches and vines concealing them, listening, eyes darting, searching. Each noise now, each play of shadows and light in the trees high above, a threat that sent a tremor of terror through her bones. From above came the sharp snap of a branch. Lucinda gasped. "Shh," Sally said. "He'll hear us." And this is a couple months later, and this is this is about the father of Sally. He comes home and is soon to discover something's not right and they're not home. It's called Crooked. When he first arrived home with a bouquet of black-eyed Susans for Rebecca and a new yellow dress and coat for Sally, Jonah Baum sensed nothing amiss. He called out for his wife and daughter and, upon receiving no reply, assumed Rebecca was out running errands and Sally was at a friend's house, as was often the case when Jonah returned from teaching his Thursday sessions of transcendental poetry and Gothic lit at Linden State. A part of him was relieved to be alone. More than a part. He did not wish to face Rebecca, not yet, and when no one home, he figured he'd get a jump on grading the papers he'd not gotten to while sleeping during his office hours in the dingy, windowless space he shared with 3 other adjuncts. If he burrowed deep enough into his work, he reasoned, he might escape the gloom cast over him by his and Rebecca's altercation the previous night. By the dull rock of ugliness hunkered in his gut, he knew his part was lamentable. He'd overreacted to his suspicions, and when Rebecca came home later, he'd have apologizing to do. And he'd gladly do it. How much apologizing he couldn't say. He'd not seen Rebecca or Sally that morning to gauge mood. With the world still dark, he'd stolen out of his house and into the black, cold dawn like a criminal from a crime scene. Whatever Jonah's level of culpability, the yellow dress and coat Sally had wanted, and the cache of Rebecca's favorite flowers he'd picked across the road along the river would carry him through. Perhaps, a voice said, Rebecca isn't home yet because Rebecca does not wish to be home yet. Jonah shrugged off the voice and entered the living room, stepped around Sally's menagerie of stuffed animals, preciously arranged for tea around the scuffed coffee table, which had a matchbook wedged under one leg to level it. Jonah stopped. The watercolor painting of Gore Mountain hung crooked on the wall. Nothing new. The train that rampaged past on the tracks just across the river from their old house saw to that twice a day. Soon after moving here, Rebecca had learned to place her fragile knickknacks at the rear of shelves to keep them from skittering over the edge from the train's vibration. The crooked painting drove Rebecca mad. Her outrage so disproportionate to the painting's affront that Jonah had once teased that the painting and the train were conspiring to undermine her sanity. She'd slapped his arm, hard. Not funny. No, it wasn't. Normally, the painting didn't bother Jonah. If he straightened it, it would only go crooked again later this evening when the train rumbled north. But something about the painting bothered him now, and he straightened it with a blush of satisfaction as disproportionate to the deed as was Rebecca's ire toward the painting being crooked to begin with. At the kitchen sink, Jonah filled an empty wine bottle with water and arranged the flowers, most certainly the last blooms of autumn. Jonah plunked his backpack and the bag with Sally's dress and coat on the table, searched the refrigerator for a Rolling Rock. Realizing he must have drunk all his beer the previous night, he unearthed Rebecca's 2 4-packs of Bartles and James, cracked open a bottle and put half of it down at a go, scowling at its sweetness as he settled in to correct the papers with his blue pen. Jonah never used a red pencil to correct papers. As a boy, he'd suffered enough of the shaming red graffiti on his own schoolwork, despite his every effort to focus and to study hard, despite his empty stomach and the bullying exacted on him for his high-water jeans and the hand-me-down shirts 2 sizes too small that he had to tug down at the back to cover his ass crack and the bruises. He'd promised himself that when he grew up, he'd never demean kids or dismiss their problems as petty. One never knew how deep the secret pains of others cut. Perhaps he was soft to keep promises made as a boy, whose every cell had been replaced by new cells so many times in his 33 years that 100 generations of himself now stood between the boy he'd been and the man he was. He was no longer who he'd once been, mercifully. That's it. I should add that when it jumps forward many years, when he finds the girl he thinks is linked to this disappearance, Lucinda, who's in the pit at the beginning, is now a deputy sheriff. And so Ezra's running her ailing father's grain and feed, and her father at the time, when she was young, was the sheriff of the town. So there's a lot of town history and those things involved. So anyway, anyone have any questions?
Were those the two first chapters, or were they sort of out of sequence somehow?
One was a prologue of the girls in the pit, and then it jumped ahead a
So you
little
started
bit.
as where we would
Yeah.
start. Yeah. Good.
Yep, that starts right there, right where the book starts. Yeah.
Was there anything in particular that influenced this this plotline? Like, was there anything that just, what was the aha moment that started this story?
So I usually start with an image that really bothers me, it intrigues me, and for this it was two things. It was a scene of Jonah many years later, right before he finds this other girl up in the woods by his cabin where he's a recluse. But I didn't know anything about his past. I just knew he was on the porch of a grain and feed, and he was incensed and he was enraged about what had transpired in the grain and feed. And he felt betrayed by the person who ran the grain and feed, and I didn't know anything about him except that, here was this guy feeling betrayed and outraged and at the end of things, and I said, well, I really want to figure out what's going on with this guy, and I write in a way that once I'm in a rhythm, I'm just sort of a witness, and so he leaves and I follow him in his truck up the hill. I don't know he's a recluse until I find out that he's driving up and then walking up through the woods for quite a ways to an old cabin, and along the way I figure out that something's happened in his past, and the woman in the store is connected to it, and then the brain and the story just sort of work together to figure out what those things are. And I soon discovered there was, his wife and child had gone missing years ago, and that the woman in the store was friends with his daughter at the time. And she's done something in the store now that she runs the store that he feels betrayed by, because she's sort of the only person that he really trusts in town, that he really believes he had nothing to do with what happened. So that's where it goes from there.
So you see, when you start in, you don't see the story, you don't have a clue yourself what's going to happen in this story that's unraveling to you. It's like,
Yeah.
you don't see an end and try to
No,
get the pieces together.
I
make
rarely
end
see the
sense.
end.
You don't see that. You just
No.
so the end is a surprise to you. When does the end reveal itself to you? In the middle of the story, or
Late,
must
pretty,
at some
pretty
point
late.
start working toward the
Pretty
end?
late. I mean, I'll start to get a sense of how things, why things happen the way they did, which leads to the ending. What I have to sort of reveal to the reader, but it's usually pretty far along, pretty late and long. I mean, the Silent Girls, I wrote the ending when that was the last thing left to write. I mean, I knew all these other things culminated, and then there was like this last 5 pages or so that comes to a pretty surprising, shocking ending for a lot of readers, and to me. So I'll learn usually when readers are surprised. That's the point at which I was surprised as well, and I really like that. And sometimes those ideas don't work. The original one didn't work the way I hoped or thought, so I'll have to rewrite and edit, or sometimes abandon things and take another take. But most often, the real critical things that come up do work. There's something going on in my subconscious storytelling brain that I work to arrive at. And my wife knows, there's many times we work across each other at the table a lot, and she's a writer as well, and I'll write myself into corners all the time. I don't know how I'm going to get out of it.
You have to get them out of it.
So,
So your schedule, you work together, you're doing this together, is it morning time you get up and you say, I'm going to write so many pages, or I'm going to finish a chapter?
I never have a page count or a word count. I know some writers do work that way, and it's useful to them. But we get up and we take care of the kids, and we get them to school if they're going to school or wherever, and then Meredith writes what she writes and edits what she edits for her job, and then I sit down with her and we get our coffee going, and I sit there and write on and off Monday through Friday, all day on and off, and if I hit a snag and just can't figure out the next thing, I'll edit earlier stuff, or I'll work on something else. I try to leave off on a sense of, instead of totally depleting my ideas for the day, like just a trick of writers have had for a long time, I think, that leave right when you're on just about really excited about the next thing, so that next morning I can jump right in and go after it, instead of exhausting yourself the night before and then now I gotta start entirely fresh. And I get a lot of ideas and a lot of twists when I'm not writing as well. When I'm mowing the lawn, or I'm painting the house, or I'm fishing. When my mind's relaxed, but it's going, and it's kind of working. And all of a sudden I'll get the idea, and I'll tell Meredith, I got it.
And
I'll
long drives too.
And long drives, yeah.
Do you keep a notebook, or you write it on your phone? Or?
I keep a notebook. In fact, I write almost in entirety my first drafts of novels with a pencil and notebooks. So I have boxes and boxes and stacks of notebooks. So all of the first drafts, or a great majority of the first drafts, are in notebooks. And my wife will buy me nice notebooks for my birthday or Father's Day or whatever, and then I'll write in the Mead spirals the rest of the time, and then she'll buy me some nice notebooks again, which are great to write in. So.
Do you have a length of book in mind? How do you know when to stop?
I don't have a length in mind. It seems to be that I tend to just generally write 100, 110, 20,000 words of a really bad loose novel, really not, nothing, and then it seems like I've arrived at a pattern where if I cut 30,000 words from that and hone it down, I really love the honing down and the distilling and the, trying to say the same thing with fewer words, and using just the right verb or just the right, image. They tend to come out 80 to 90,000 words, but I'm not targeting a certain amount. It seems to be where they arrive at for some reason.
Was your decision to become an author, was it on purpose or an accident? Like you just started writing, and one day you're like, oh.
Yeah. Well, kind of both. I mean, I always loved writing. I always loved reading, and when I would read as a kid, I would read all kinds of fiction where the red fern grows, and I would read Algonquin books about dogs, and then Encyclopedia Brown and Great Brain, but then early on to darker stuff, Roald Dahl's darker short stories, and Poe, and King, and then a little later on King and Joe's work, and Dean Koontz and different people, and I always wrote when I would finish something reading it. I was excited to read what's next to read. But also intrigued and marveling at, well, wait a second, what just happened here? How did I read a bunch of certain words strung together that scared me, or made me laugh, or made me scared, or made me cry, or made me, have all these different thoughts and feelings? How did someone do that? It was sort of a magic act. So I would write and write and write, and then, later on I would write and submit short stories, because that's what I was writing, and I got some published. And then one day I was sitting down to write short stories, another short story, and it turned out to be 70 pages of a woman sitting in a trailer with her oven door open because the propane ran out in her trailer, and she needed to stay warm, so she used the electric stove to keep warm the oven. And there were these out-of-staters from Montreal who were stuck in the road out front, and she went out there and hauled them out, thinking she'd get a few bucks, and they just kind of stiff her and drive off. And I said, there's something going on here, and because I got 70 pages, and then all this other stuff started, and that turned out to be Reap. And I hadn't set out to write a novel. I thought one day I would, but that's how that happened. So it was kind of both. I wanted to be a writer and envisioned being a writer, and then sort of the idea of the novel came out of the blue. And I just kept writing from there. And there's ups and downs in publishing. Writing and publishing are two different things entirely. After Reap came out, it did really well critically, and but didn't sell what the publisher at the time had hoped. And I had many years where I never thought I'd get published again, but I kept writing anyway, because I don't feel comfortable when I'm not writing. I feel like something's missing. So I kept writing anyway, and then eventually something stuck. The Silent Girls came out, and these others, and
So while you were waiting after Reap, and did you go back to getting short stories in magazines?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I published, I don't know, another half a dozen short stories here and there, and it's, speaking the publishing versus writing world, I still have a couple short stories that I've written recently, and within the last few years or whatever, and I think they're as good as anything I've written, and I've got 5 books out and all these other things, and I get the same standard stock rejection letters from magazines that I got 20 years ago. Dear writer, thanks, but no thanks.
What magazines?
Editor,
What magazines are you seeing?
Oh, literary magazines, different,
Yeah.
some more commercial magazines. And then I'll get, one in have a couple coming out in this magazine called Cemetery Dance, which Joe, I'm sure, is probably familiar with. And I've, 20 plus years ago, I had submitted my first short story to that, and it was my first rejection, and of many, dozens of rejections. And I kept that slip. It's somewhere, but in this weird world we live in now, I was on Twitter and I saw this name, Richard Chismar. I was like, wait a second. And then we had been following each other. I was like, oh, he founded Cemetery Dance, and so and he was tweeting stuff about the Silent Girls and how much he liked it. And so I sent him a little note, said, hey, you were my first rejection. And he's like, you're kidding me. I rejected you. I was like, well, it was actually, the story sucked, which it did. It was a terrible story. I mean, it was awful. I thought it was good, but it was awful. It was a really bad story. And he said, well, what else you got? 20 years later. So I sent him a couple, and he loved them. And I'm like, man, you guys are like my New Yorker, So I'm excited, just as excited about having a short story published in a magazine like that as any novel by a big publisher or whatever. Writers are kind of strange, I guess.
Well, that magazine is sort of venerable now. I mean, in that it's been around for 20 years.
Yeah.
It's a genre publication. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, because there were a lot of others along the way, Pulp House and quite a few that, and he's really, he's a great guy too. He's a really nice guy from, what I communicate with him through emails and stuff.
Well, think of your short stories, do you ever write anything in other genres? Like I think of, like Shirley Jackson, who she wrote these, these very chilling, novels and stories, but then she also wrote these really lighthearted, family pieces. Like,
Right.
Is there anything else that you, even if it just stays in the notebook, is there images that other genres that appeal to you?
Yeah, they do, and the one I'm finishing up now is somewhat different. Certainly takes place more in a less rural place and more of more in the town center, and has less to do with the woods and the lore and the Gothic. And I'm very compelled too to, maybe it's because of the kids or just being interested in those things in general. I have interest in writing less dark things that are, children oriented or sweeter stories than these. These can be pretty dark.
I had the radio on today as I was driving, and somebody was talking about a program or effort that has been made honoring, I believe, the bicentennial of the publication of Frankenstein, to try to come up with the 100 best, dark or scary books or stories. I may not be
Yeah.
presenting that exactly, but it did get me to thinking. I guess thinking more than I realized I was, because I think I missed my exit. What is there that attracts people to that? And I may throw that question to both of you,
Yeah.
but it has sold some books for both of you, and obviously people enjoy reading it. But why do people like being creeped out?
That is an eternal question. Why would you like to be creeped out? And some people don't like to be creeped out at all. My wife doesn't like to be intentionally creeped out, really, in most cases. And I don't know. I just know when I read, when I first read The Telltale Heart in Mrs. York's class in 7th grade, I could still remember, and I was just, what is this? And there was something about the narrator and the voice and being off, and I'm not sure why I gravitate, and millions and millions and millions of people gravitate toward that. I think we do have a fear of the unknown, and I know, Stephen King will say, in reading those things, it makes us feel safer because we're not the ones that are actually part of it. But I can't explain my own thrill, and certainly I have less taste for certain things. I try to write. I didn't set out to write, dark books. I set out to write crime novels and suspense, books that had a strong sense of story and a strong sense of the Gothic and things like that. And but they do turn out pretty dark. Other people's relative idea of darkness to mine is quite different.
I think teenagers are attracted, like the teenagers, they love Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
And we think, oh, that's classic. Why would they like that kind
Right,
of
right.
stuff? But,
Yeah.
they had to read every one,
Yeah.
Well, I might also add that I worked for a while at the prison up the road from here in Springfield, and the librarian told me one time or another that certainly Stephen King was her most popular author in the library among prison inmates. I take that for what it's worth. I think you were probably second, Joe.
So I don't know. Anyone else want to speak to their own personal, why dark stories, grab us so much, or why we're interested in it? It's an age-old question.
I'm actually repelled by them.
Yeah.
No, thank you. I don't go there.
kind of helps. I mean, it's sort of similar to, I guess what Stephen King was going with was by saying it makes us feel more safe. But just reading these stories about, whether it's killers, just humans, or whether it's just it's a dark demon like Lovecraft, or if it's, putting a name to something that's out there in the dark, it's makes you feel a little better about it. I devoured, Stephen King, Shirley Jackson, Joe Citro. I mean, any of these, R.L. Stein.
Yeah.
I'm being scared. It's fun.
Yeah, and there's there's something about there's all these genres, but really I don't know what genre means that much, because there's suspense and there's something about just being on the edge of your seat, of not knowing what's going to happen. And I think sometimes books, novels, and stories that have a darker element can lend toward that feeling even more of what's going to happen and how is this going to resolve itself, and is it going to be okay in the end. And our daughter's really into Nancy Drew now. She's 7, and there's some stuff in there that I didn't realize Nancy Drew, with older women being put in insane asylums against their will. I thought it was about who stole the potted flowers from the window. And it's who's kidnapping who and pretending they're their parents so they can steal the kid's inheritance. And I didn't realize it. But they end on such cliffhangers. She can't stop reading them now, or have us read them too.
I grew up on the Nancy Drew books, and I used to love them,
Yeah.
Well, what's going to happen?
Yeah, what's going to happen next?
How are they going to get out of that?
Yeah.
You mentioned that when you sometimes feel a little stuck, you'll go and edit something. Does it ever get complicated to edit something while the story is still happening?
No, I do it quite frequently. It's part of my whole routine. Every day I'll edit something I've worked on, part of it. Yeah. So by the time I get a draft to an editor, I mean, I've gone from beginning to end. When there's finally a beginning, a middle, and an end, I'll go through it dozens and dozens of times. Once for dialogue, once for this character, once for this just setting, once for word choice, once for whatever. But along the way, when I finally arrive to a beginning and middle end, the first, half and 2/3, because I go back over and over while I'm writing the new stuff. I've probably been over, 50 times or more. But it's just sort of how I work. And I know some writers just write a rough draft, beginning to end. They don't, they just go all out, and that works for them really well. I've never quite written a novel like that because I just keep going back for whatever reason.
So I
Just write the first
Yeah.
draft right out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you end up with something that's you put back on the shelf because you've been editing and it keeps changing and just give up after a while?
No, I've never given up on a book.
Okay.
I haven't given up on a book. Publishers have. I have one book that I wrote that I will probably never see the light, but I wrote it quite a while ago. But I've been working on the last 30 pages of the one I'm finishing up now for on and off for most of the summer. There's been things that have interrupted some of my regular writing, but it's like a wrestling match after a while. I've got to pin this thing down, and once I break the code, then it's real easy to go back and rewrite and make all the little things work and make it so that those one or two little things that you read over, become the big things that you missed before. Not just in a mystery or suspense way, but just in that, most books are mysteries, and even if, it's high literature or whatever it is, there's things when you get to the end of a novel, I feel novels should be circles. They're not even, this, oh, you read out a climax and then it falls, that graph. To me, they should be circles like a short story where the end reflects all the way back to the very beginning in a way, but it also projects forward some, and I love working with that and getting it so it's like that.
Do you normally, between the point where you finish working on a manuscript and before you send it off to your agent or editor, do you have other readers that you like? How many, and how do you what's the logistics of that for you?
Meredith reads it first, when I'm done,
Yeah.
and if it gives her nightmares, I've had it where she's read the first 28 pages in bed and
So if you don't
had
sleep,
literally had nightmares, and then or if she cries at the end, that's good.
check that out.
That's even better than nightmares in some ways. So she's my primary reader. I have a friend, Mark Saunders, that will read, and this friend Phil, who had read some stuff earlier on, and but I feel pretty confident by the time I've gone through it now myself so many times, and then had Meredith read it, and she's helped me. Her eyes sharp when she says something really like this subplot with this character, like in What Remains of Her, really needs to go because it's just not the right tone. It's hokey or whatever. Then I feel pretty confident in her judgment, and then very confident, and then I'll send it to my editor and cross my fingers.
This question changes the direction a little bit, but you mentioned right at the beginning that you like using the setting of the Northeast Kingdom,
Mhm.
the kind of northern forest, but you live in the, shall we call it, Southwest Kingdom?
Yep.
Yeah. And
Which
I probably
parts of
should know
that
the
can
answer to this,
parts
but
of that
have
can
you-
be just
have
as
you
remote.
used Arlington or Bennington County as your setting?
I've used not explicitly. What's that? But yeah, I've used pieces of it, and I'll also use pieces of like my hometown or other parts of the Vermont, or so I've used the Wayside Country Store that's just down the road from us, which I really love, in Arlington, West Arlington. That's in the names of dead girls, and I use it by name. I changed it a little bit, but a lot of it and where it's located on this not desolate road, but it's paved, but after a certain time of night, it's a pretty desolate stretch of road, and when the fog comes off the Battenkill River. So, and then the library in the town that I grew up in is in Lion Waite, and so it's a whole piecemeal. But I haven't set anything right in Arlington
Yeah, I
per
happened
se.
to open
but-
this to a page at random and noticed that you pulled the Chiselville Bridge out of it.
Right, so that's right. That's literally within walking distance from our house.
Oh, okay.
So place names, I'll steal from anywhere. So like, there's this Beth Cannell who lives up in a little ways up from here and has Kingdom Books, or did, and she's reviewed a couple of my books, and she'll always end sort of, do not use his kingdom as a road map because you'll end up lost. Because I love using place names that make sense, that lend to that feeling of this is, an odd, out of the way place, like Chiselville Bridge, even though it's around the corner from me, works really well
We still do
for
have
that.
a lot of out of the way
Yeah.
places in Vermont.
And in Southwest Vermont, there's places, when you drive over from Bennington to Brattleboro or Arlington over Kelly's, this place called Kelly's Stand over to Dover, Mount Snow. It's closed in the winter, and you don't want to be lost up there. You can, I know my way around really well, and I deer hunt all over the place up there. But as far as someone, who's not familiar with the area, you could get lost pretty quick.
That lends
keep
to
track?
the intrigue too.
How do you keep track? So say you have a character who, I don't know, say he takes his slippers off and gets into bed or something, and that's not a good example, takes his slippers off, puts his shoes on, and then later on, there's a question, you know, like his shoes maybe come up. How do you keep track of those subtle details? Those things that happen in movies and people love to find
Continuity,
them.
yeah.
How do you keep track of that?
I don't. I try. It's really, it gets to a certain point, and I don't outline books. I never outline, but at some point when I'm 3/4 of the way through, I do have to start making notes, real notes about who's who and what and how old they are, and you know, it does become pretty complicated after a while to keep track of it all. And luckily, like at the publisher, you know, they do have someone that reads with that in mind, and they're really sharp, and they really help, and they catch that stuff. They'll say, you know, on page 268 you have this about this, and that doesn't jibe with page 17, you know, and there's no way I could have ever sussed that out myself. So, you know, I'm lucky to have, you know, those people with those eyes. But it does become very, very tricky to, you know, and I'll have people mention things about a book, you know, even this book that just came out. I'll be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't even remember writing it, you know. You know, because it's I'm just on to the next one, because, you know, I finished writing this one, you know, 15 months ago. You know, because it takes about a year for them to go through the editing process and get things set up, and if not more than that. So I finished writing this one and being done with it, you know, quite a while ago. So, and I'm so into the next one that I forget things.
Now, you've written 3 books. Do you call them, do you think of them as a series with the same characters, Kanan, twins?
Yeah, you know, I didn't intend to write a series. The Silent Girls came out first, and it ended on such a dramatic note that there was much more could be much more to come, but I didn't know if there was. And but the more it sort of bothered me, the more I wanted to figure out, like the guy standing on the grain and feed being incensed. I wanted to know what happened after the Silent Girls ended, like a lot of readers did too. So I wrote that book, but I also wrote Lie in Wait, which has Sonia Test, who's a side character in the Silent Girls. She's a detective as well, but I really felt I had a story for her own book. And Lie in Wait was a novel that I had written a draft of previously, and felt that story will really work for her, because it's in large part set up in the same area and involves a certain crime, and it worked really well. So they ended up, because of the characters, being a series. Yeah.
Do you think you can pick it up again?
Yeah, I will. I want to. I have 2 ideas for the next 2 books. One Meredith really, really likes, and another one I like. I like them both, but so I think, yeah, there is enough there in my head that once I sit down to write them, they'll do their thing. I hope, present themselves to me. I hope.
How long is the process when it's New York work? Like, so from the time you're writing it until you send it to the editor, how long does that take you?
It varies, but, you know, Reap took me quite a while. It took 3 years. The others have taken me probably about a year apiece. Yeah, about a year or so.
You know why Reap took you so long?
I was writing a lot of short stories at the time as well, and it was my first book, and I didn't know how to write a novel, or how to, you know, I still don't. None of us do, I don't think. But and I was only 26, so I was just kind of feeling my way around, and I don't know. That's just what it took. You know, it's weird. It's strange how it works.
With your characters' development and their personalities, do you draw on people that you know? Like, my brother is self-published author. Nobody knows him. And he's got a lot of characters in his book. Like, all of us are in his book.
Mhm.
And he just has our name in there. Or, like, in one of his books, he killed me off.
Mhm.
In another book,
Rivalry?
yeah, I don't know. In another book, he made me a nun. But, so, you know, like, when he's thinking about a character, he's got a vision in his mind,
Mhm.
and then it's somebody that he knows
Mhm.
personally.
Sometimes, not often. There's sometimes little pieces, or I'll use names, you know, that I like, that fit for a character, but then that's the extent of how much it reflects the person, is basically the name. I just like the name. I mean, there's flourishes here and there. Sometimes I'll steal stuff our kids say, you know, for domestic scenes with Sonia Test, and you know, little things that happen. Mostly the lighter stuff about how, you know, I don't know how to roast a turkey. And I had a conversation with your mom about, you know, no one can figure it out. No one likes turkey anyway, because if we did, we'd have it more than once a year, you know. And so little things like that, you know, we'll find a way. Or my sister's sweet potato casserole makes, you know, or my sister Beth and I, when we were little, did go to a pit in the woods. And it was very much like this pit. With the frogs and the snakes and the toads and the whole thing, because they would fall in there, and we loved it. And it was just down the road from this camp we had in Waitsfield, and we didn't tell our parents we went there because we knew they wouldn't want us there, and we just thought it was so mysterious and, you know, strange, and we had all these stories about it. So things like that, but never like a particular person, and you could clearly tell it was so and so.
Did you tell her scary stories at the time?
Yeah, we always told scary stories. It's strange because all three of my sisters like dark stories as well.
Now, you said that you have written some lighter type thing, but you haven't published anything yet. And what are you gearing that to? Your daughter? You know, trying to
My
keep it
wife
down,
has
or-
2 great series that she tells, or used to tell our daughter in bed, that I think she should write down,
Uh-huh.
capture, because they're fantastic stories, really great stories, and I can see them with the watercolor pages and stuff. I haven't really, I mean, I've written stories that aren't as dark as these, and I mean, to some people they'd probably still be fairly dark. But I just feel like I'm shifting toward, I do want to write, you know, some other types of stories. Like this person said, even if they don't get published, I want to put them down.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Letting me ramble.
And you